What is it like when a torture instrument is forgotten by memory in society, but it lives on in intergenerational trauma? More than metal was the iron bit. It was dead silence wrought into steel, but then what followed the silence? This is the narrative of what the iron bit left behind and why its heritage continues to haunt us, even in the event we cannot see it in museums. By the middle of the 1800s, the iron bit was becoming obsolete, not, however, because it was considered inhumane to somebody. It was fading out since slavery was already being questioned around the world through the abolitionists. However, the harm that it caused, both physically, mentally, and intergenerationally, stayed in the bodies and minds of the now freed. The iron bit did not only ruin voice boxes, it demolished language, culture, and trust. Feel what it must have been like to have lived through that hell. Your lips cut, your tongue sliced, your identity silenced. How do you recover when you have been raped in the occupation of your own words? The ex-slaves still held the slavery scars, even after being freed. Most of them never wanted to discuss their experiences. This is no longer a side effect of silence torture, but it has become a way of self-defense. Oral history was fighting a hard battle to exist, since the oral part of the human body, the voice, had been a target of torture. We can feel the vestige of this pain in such memoirs as those of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs. Douglass himself, though he did not directly describe the iron bit, talked about the mind war of constraint of silence. The black night of slavery had grown over me. And look, a man became a brute, but silently defiance boiled. The slaves fought back in order to be vocal again, literally or figuratively speaking. The hush harbors were sacred premises in the American South. The clandestine meetings, held either in forests or swamps, were places where enslaved individuals could sing, pray, and talk openly, without the supervision of the whites. Such were not merely spiritual havens, they were political defiances. They had carried with them African linguistic rhythms and narrating styles, which the iron bit had attempted to wipe out. The living resistance were also runaways. Harriet Tubman, who was herself so beaten that she could experience seizures throughout her life, became an advocate of hundreds. Underground Railroad was not the story of struggle out of the chains, but against the forced silence. And on each utterance of each word that went in whisper over plantation to safe house, a complete slap at the face of the iron bit heritage. Even songs of the slaves, such elusive spirituals that still haunt our domestic ears, developed into a means of communication and a veritable code of resistance. Not only calls on high, go down Moses, and wade in the water. They were well-designed messages. The fact that people could sing after years of dictated silence was a revolutionary act. The iron bit was not an exclusively American instrument. Mouth gags and variations, including silent bridles, were used throughout the Atlantic world. Similar devices were actually used in the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica, Barbados, and Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, which were major sugar plantations. The enslaved people who were caught using their mouths to talk back or sing African songs or worship privately had iron and leather muzzles stapled onto their heads. In the records of one French plantation overseer at Saint-Domingue, it was coldly written, "They should not be left to recollect who they used to be. When there is the need to shut your mouth, metal will speak." In Brazil, iron mouthpiece, ferro de boca, would sometimes be accompanied by neck collars and thumb screws. Brazil, the biggest receiver of the enslaved Africans, had huge plantations of sugar and coffee. The same was to be achieved, denying identity, disallowing rebellion, and silencing. The physical device is not the only element that links these global atrocities together, but also the ideology of the device. The great assumption was that a human voice was in fact property, controlled, deleted. Although the iron bit has a gruesome history, it does not see much view in any kind of open display. Why? It is uncomfortable, unphotogenic, violent to an extent that questions the discourses on civilized history. Tour through the largest museums of the US, France, or Britain, and you might go across shackles, branding irons or whips. The iron bit, often missing. Why? Since it is more than dealing with a pain, it is dealing with erasure. Its silence has worked until present. Few places, notably the Whitney Plantation Museum in Louisiana or the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, have even tried to display the paraphernalia of mental torture, like muzzles and gags. However, even these venues admit that getting original iron pieces nowadays is a hard task. Most of them were destroyed, concealed, or lost. Other people suggest that this lack is deliberate. According to historian Simon Gikandi in her novel Slavery and the Culture of Taste, most of the colonialists desired slavery to be depicted as an unfortunate event, but not monstrous. The iron bit prevents that lie. Nevertheless, the bit into the mouth has come back. Not metaphorically, but ironically. Its memory is being revived by the artists, poets, and filmmakers. Kara Walker, the African-American visual artist who creates haunting silhouettes, has conjured up the idea of silenced black bodies. The muzzle gains a symbolic role in performance art, in a way that it is not only an instrument of slavery, but also censorship and other forms of inequity in the present time, as well as how systems are working to silence people. In fiction, Beloved, described by Toni Morrison, does not deal directly with the iron bit. It is only the spirit of it, the ghostwriting, the muting out, and the erasure. Literature. The character Seth states, "They took away the mouth of my baby," a straight-down echo of what was intended to be done by the iron bit. Even in modern demonstrations, especially in the Black Lives Matter, some demonstrators had a symbolic muzzle on their mouths, as an indication of how the voices of black people have been historically suppressed. Even with fashion, the symbols of bondage have come to be reinvented and reimagined, not as a way to glorify bondage, but as a way of pushing people to look at it. This is what occurred. You cannot shut your eyes any longer. When we imagine the idea of torture, we usually think back to some barbaric time, another thing relegated to the footnotes of the history books. But the iron bit does not want to be unburied only, since its wounds have never been allowed to heal. Its name is remembered in the traumas of generation after generation, in the forgetting of cultures, and in the shattered lines of the family trees of descendants of slaves. It is live in these weird lapses when we fumble over the words to say something honestly about slavery. This haunts the lost museum plaques, the unidentified victims, and the anonymous graves. The iron bit muted the population through centuries. Today we talk, loudly, relentlessly. It is memory, which is resistance, and memory is power. Thanks for watching. When this story touched you, it should not simply stop. Share it, discuss it, speak up on behalf of others who had no right to. And in case you think that history must not just be forgotten or even sanitized, subscribe to our channel. The voice of the people counts. Since the more we talk, the less silence has the power.